Hello everybody, I'm Don Counts and we're at the Warrior Project in Fayetteville, Tennessee. And the Warrior Project's a place where they have all kinds of pictures from people in the Lincoln County, Tennessee area that served in the military throughout way back. And we have a World War II veteran with us today, Mr. Billy Norman. Billy Norman has probably caught more fish and sold more furniture than anybody I know. Would you agree with that?
Well, I taught Joe Young all that he ever knew about fishing. I got him started.
You got him started?
Got him started.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now from there, of course, that was one mistake I made, among others. But
Yep.
I went in the Navy 75 years ago. It's getting a little bit difficult to remember how pretty I was at that time and all the things that have happened since then. But had my first job at Carter's Drugstore, working behind the soda fountain. Worked over there with a great fellow named R.K. Locker. R.K. was one of those that didn't make it home. He got killed in a B-24 bomber crash. And of course, a lot of the people that I knew on this wall behind me did the same thing. They weren't fortunate enough to get back home. Now, if you could have interviewed people like that, you would have been interviewing heroes. I was just one of those out of 16 million people that was in service at one time. And I think we're down now to about 400,000 left out of World War II. So I look at the obituaries quite often, make sure my name's not in there, because that's you're getting close.
75 years ago, how old were you?
I went in, I was 17 years old, and thought I knew everything there was to know. And at that particular phase of life, I didn't have sense enough to be afraid. But later on, I learned I should have been. And we took off from San Francisco. I believe it was on the 8th or 9th of that year when the war ended. And we were in a convoy. Of course, they told you back then, they didn't say we're going here, there, yonder. They just said, get on, we're going. And so I got on, we were going on troop ship, about 4,000 of us on there. And when we got out into the Marshall Islands, on that morning, they announced that the war had ended. Of course, I don't know whether they knew what to do with us or not, so they were going to send us on up to Okinawa. And they called us back. They were having a typhoon come through, and bloody it was a booger. We were up there later on in April the next year, and ships were sitting up on the side of the hill as though they'd been built there when they were blown there with that thing.
Typhoon like a tornado or
Like
a hurricane?
Well, yeah, over in the South Pacific, you have typhoons.
Oh, okay.
Same thing as a hurricane, except it's just reversed.
Okay.
And so I've grandfathered in to run a landing craft, kind of like those you see on D-Day, which I was not part of, but where you haul troops and machines and all that good stuff, drop your ramp down and unload. Well, my job every morning was to go at Buckner Bay when we were in Okinawa, was to drive across the bay, pick up the mail, and I remember having to dodge the masts of ships that had been sunk during that typhoon.
Wow.
And of course, back then, it was a different ball game. Oh, by the way, I may be wrong on this. I believe we drew $59 a month pay, and then when we got in the combat zone, we drew $99 a month.
Wow.
And of course, that amount of money back then compared to today would have been tremendous.
Yeah.
As far as the value of it. And but Lord, no, I wouldn't take anything for the experience. I did miss the Korean War because we got back in Memphis in '46 to get discharged, and the old assault says, fellas, y'all ought to stay in the Navy. It's never going to be another war. And so I said, well, this sounds great. So I went over to sign up at 1 o'clock. He came on board, said, fellas, I'm sorry, I can't do your paperwork till tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm going home tonight. So I went home tonight, and I missed. Of course, the Navy didn't play that big a part in the Korean War. They weren't like the guys out there in the trenches at below zero weather. And but when I look back over read about the World War II and the thousands and thousands that we lost, it's just hard to comprehend, especially for young folks today, that many people sacrificed their lives. And what did they sacrifice for? Well, I think they had a great goal in mind. They wanted to protect the world from people like Hitler, Tojo in Japan, and they did do a great job. And many, many, many of them, not only some of them did get to come back home, but many of them suffered the worst of atrocities that you can imagine, how they were treated over a period of time. and how they held up and kept their nerve about them, I do not know. Of course, if you've ever seen that what's that movie that came out now that's anyway, a book out on it, too, about what this young fellow suffered all the way through, and it's pitiful. But no, in the Navy, we didn't do the hard training that like for instance the Marines did. When we went to Great Lakes for what called boot camp. Of course, we had what you call firefighting drills, where you went in and put these buildings out of fire, and we had machine gunnery where you shot at planes and all that good stuff. But when you're 17 years old, it really seems more like a lot of fun than it is a lot of necessity. And of course, now I look back at all the friends I had. One of them's on the wall behind me here, Johnny Parsons. Now we used to double date some, and Johnny was on a destroyer, and they got hit off of Okinawa, I think in May of '45, and he was a radio man, and a kamikaze nailed them, went right through the middle of the ship, and it was out of 300, I think only 18 survived, and he was not one of the 18. And then I had another good friend that was on the Indianapolis, and they had just delivered a bomb, atomic bomb to Tinian, and they were on their way back for training in the Philippines, and they were running by themselves at nighttime and got torpedoed, and out of 1,100 men, only 300 and something survived. A boy named Kinky Collier. Of course, Kinky said he stayed off by himself as much as he could. Why? I don't know. They couldn't drink the water. They had nothing to eat. And how they survived 4 days and not putting their mouth in that water, I do not understand. I don't believe I could have done it.
Wow.
But Kinky was one of 318 out of 1,100.
Wow.
And the ones that didn't survive, the sharks got them all.
Wow.
And what was so sad about it, they were in the water for 4 days before the dead blasted Navy ever discovered they were gone.
Wow.
And they were picked up and found by mistake, or there wouldn't have been any of them survived. And of course, the cruiser Indianapolis had been a great ship. The president had used it. It had been taking place in a bunch of campaigns, and it was just a sleek destroyer. And I just said destroyer. Cruiser, I'll get it right in a minute. Too many years ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, I look back now, all the powdered eggs and the powdered stuff we ate, and we thought we were being starved. We had it great compared to so many of them. And they put us finally off on a little island after the war ended, called Tuba Bayo in the Philippines. And on that little island, it was more or less a place for people to fly in from another ship to be picked up by another ship, or it was one where they came in by plane or ship and to be assigned to another ship. And my job was every morning to carry them out to sign what ship they wanted to go on. And the only time I ever had any problems, I was running an LCVP, LCM that day, which is a boat that has two motors, and it stands up behind. In the back, the coxswain stands about this much exposed. And I took on board a boy with a big old monkey, and I didn't think anything about it because it wasn't my doings. So we pulled up beside a destroyer escort, and he threw his sea bag up on the deck, and the monkey jumped on the deck, and then he jumped on the deck, and the officer of the deck came down through there screaming, "Get that blankety blank! Oh, you know you can't have." He said, "That's my pet." He said, "Get him out." And he kicked that monkey back into the well of the boat. Said, "Pull away, pull away." So I pulled away, and the next thing I know, the monkey jumped up on looking me right in the eye, and started circling around. And finally, he came down on my arm like this, and I shoved him off, got out through the passageway. We go across the bay with the monkey at the control. And we finally got the sea bag emptied and to get him held down, pulled up on an inlet and dropped him off. He went bounding up the beach, so I don't know whatever happened to the monkey. but I will remember it.
I bet. You ain't gonna forget that. How are you staying in touch with your family back home?
Well, of course, back then you wrote emails or letters, and of course there wasn't this picking up a pad and punching it in the name numbers. And if you got a letter, you knew the thing was anywhere from 3 weeks to 4 weeks old.
Oh, wow.
And, but one of the big thrills we used to have here was when some of the older guys would come home in the Air Force, a fellow like Goat Stevens, who later got killed by friendly fire in Europe. He came home in a P-38, twin-engine, twin-motored, and I can still remember him diving across this square with vapor trails coming off the wings. He was going so fast.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, C.H. Junior McKinney was another one. He flew with the Flying Tigers the early part of the war. At least that's the remembrance I have. Well, C.H. used to come home in what called an AT-6, was a big trainer, And I can still remember him flying between the flagpole and the top floor of the high school. And you could see him plainly when he would come through. But those guys, there was a lot of them that did those such things. And of course, like I said, a lot of them didn't like goat, didn't make it home. He was kin to Bob Stevens' brother, and the lawyer. And Lord, oh me, the names I do remember, the names I don't remember, the times that have gone by. Remember this old square out here when you used to have Turkey Day or something like that? It'd be full of animals.
Oh wow!
And
going to the stockyard, or what was going on with them? Why were they?
Of course, right across the street from where we were was the Yearwood Mule Barn,
Right.
And they'd have Mule Day, and they'd have all these things. They'd have a Blue Ribbon Day where everybody that was in grade school that had perfect teeth could march in the Blue Raid Parade. That was something you wanted to do, and that was just a one-day affair. And but laws, I can remember we went to Robert E. Lee School, which was now has houses built on it, and our principal was named Rat Tail Wallace. RT was his name, Wallace. Lord, we were scared of him as we would have been a bear, and it paid to be. It paid to be.
Yep.
But back then, we had a lunchroom. You could get two things there. You could get a cheese sandwich and a bowl of soup, and don't ask for more, because that was it.
That was it.
And I want to think that lunch was a dime, but I'm not sure about that now. But I believe it was only 10 cents for that.
So you born and raised in Fayetteville?
Born and raised right here in the big county of Lincoln, and born up on North Main. And I keep wondering when they're going to put a shrine up there at that house where I was born, but they haven't done it yet. Oh Lord, I remember of course back then, most everybody was delivered at home.
Oh yeah.
You didn't go to the hospital to be delivered. And my mother had my grandfather was John R. Crowder. He had a fur business, and where he lived up there is where I was born. And back in those days, I know I used to show you how shameful you can be. I used to want my granddaddy to carry me to school in Robert E. Lee in the morning, because he had a much better car than we did. But anyway, we made it. Of course, how we got by on rainy days, I don't know, because there wasn't no transportation back then. Your 2 feet was it.
Yeah.
It could rain, shine, or whatever the weather might be. But laws, of course, the poor mothers back in those days, I can barely imagine what pain they must have gone through, waiting day by day, afraid they were going to get that letter. It said so-and-so's missing in action, like the Gocher boy. I've got the copies at the house of where his folks got a letter that he was missing in action, and it went on for months, and finally they announced him killed in action. And of course, that went on everywhere, but especially, and how in the name of heaven we were ever able to win that war. Germany could have invaded England, no problem at all. All they had to do was, but the guy that was in charge of the Luftwaffe, he wouldn't invade until he had air supremacy. And you owe your life, a whole lot of it, to a bunch of fellows called Spitfire pilots. They would go out 50 Spitfires against 300 or 400 planes every time they went. They had developed a little anarchy system of pulling up where the Germans were coming and going. And then the Japanese could have taken Pearl Harbor. Was all easy in the world after they got through destroying it. And if you could imagine, we'd had Germany on one end and Japan on the other end. It'd been a long, drawn-out thing. That would have been horrible.
Oh yeah.
But for some reason, they didn't invade Honolulu, and for some reason they held off invading England. And then at one time, the English had over 500,000 soldiers in the sea that had been driven out of France as France was surrendering. And why they didn't come in and wipe them out in the water, I do not know. But thank the good Lord they didn't.
Yeah.
But that's the olden days back of World War II. To me, my whole life is built around World War II. Don't ask me why, but you think about going to the show, you think about boot camp, you think about all these things that you went through, and just you associate today's things with what happened back then. And I often wonder if we'd have as many volunteers today as we had back then if a war broke out again. I don't know. I'm just throwing that in. But back then, that was a war everybody wanted to go to.
Oh, so you wanted to go?
Well, everybody wanted to go. Wasn't any question about it. And in fact, we got up Great Lakes, and Went into this huge auditorium, and we were surrounded by 15 or 20 doctors. Each one of them, one had eyes, one had your feet, one had this. I went up to the guy that did the feet, and he looked and said, "Son, I don't believe we can take you. Your feet are too flat." I said, "Sir, I just got running all day long playing basketball and football. I can run from here to dark." He said, "Go on." So that was all there was to that. But no, I would have been, I don't know, I just felt like I'd been disgraced if I'd been turned down. No, it wouldn't have been, but a lot of people were turned down because they were the health issues.
Yeah. Well, what about you? When you left here, was you scared, nervous?
If I was, I don't remember it. I mean, I just, that's the only way. It's been so long ago, 75 years ago, and it's just hard to remember all the. I went to the Navy with a boy from Coldwater named Bobby Whitaker. Bobby's daddy was the Prince of Coldwater. He owned the cotton gin, the big main store, and the railroads. He was the conductor, everything. But of course, there's no railroad there now. There's no general store, and it's all this has disappeared by the wayside. But no, what was? I went in with a bunch from North Nashville, and since they certainly won't see this interview, that was about the meanest bunch of people I've ever been around in my life. Before we got to Chicago, to go out to Great Lakes to start our training, Shore Patrol came on board and said, "Fellas, if there's one more instance out of this car, you're going straight to the brig. You're not even going out there." So that finally got that stopped. Well, a week before we got ready to come on boot leave, they came on board and said, "Fellas, if there's one more thing of stealing out of this bunch here, you're going straight to the West Coast. You're not going home on leave." Well, we picked them up, Bobby and I did, in Nashville, and we were coming off of our boot leave. And that was the drunkest, slobbinest bunch of people I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, we got back. I've often wondered how many of them wound up in the pen, but you never know.
Yeah. How long did you train before you went on to war?
Well, we went back to Great Lakes after our 1 week, and the next week we went straight to the West Coast. And then went out there. When the first thing they did, they took us to a base, but then they shipped us over to called Treasure Island. Now, when you got on Treasure Island, you knew you were headed to sea because you couldn't call, you couldn't write, you were just quarantined there. You might be 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever, but once you were there. So then after our time came up, we left in a convoy, and we left about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I got, best I can remember, I got right up midship. I've never been seasick. Thank the good Lord, I saw too many people that were, and it's pitiful. But what we did, then when we got out of the Marshall Islands, that's when the war ended. I remember standing amidships when they announced the war was over. And so they didn't know really what to do with us. They just sort of shifted us around, and finally they dropped us off in the Philippines. And then a week later we were picked up to go to Okinawa, and that's when the hurricane was coming. I'll get right, typhoon. So we called us back from that, and so then I grandfathered in to running a landing craft. I didn't go to landing craft school like so many of them did, but it was quite an experience. And over there, I did see a couple of people that I knew. One of them was Charlene Reeves, the ex-policeman, if you remember Charlene. And the reason I remembered him, my job when a carrier would come in there to pick up guys going home, they'd publish a list when I could look at my list and see who was from Fayetteville. And he and one other boy, the only ones I ever saw, we were walking down the jungle trail, and we looked back at each other, and we don't know you. we knew each other.
That had to feel good. See somebody you know.
Somebody you knew, and it was quite an experience. I mean, I was not in harm's way compared to some of these guys, like on that board out there. But I got to say that I wouldn't take anything for it. I wouldn't want to repeat it, but I wouldn't take anything in the world for it. And there's so many of those guys, like Dr. Reuben Crawford on the wall out there, like Billy Bob Carter. They really went through some trying experiences. We're very fortunate to live to come back home. And a lot of them on that board out there are just like that. And these poor Marine boys that went through what they did on Guadalcanal and all those places. We had a man here named Chris Patrick. He was in the courthouse. I don't know whether you remember Chris or not, but he came back one time in '43. He'd been on Okinawa. No, I'm sorry. He'd been on Guadalcanal. Anyway, he had captured a Japanese machine gun, and he was over there on a bond drew, asking people to give to the bond. He had that machine gun with him. And of course, he had quite an experience going through all that over there. And so no wonder to me, or there is a wonder, why as many of these boys that came home back then didn't suffer from traumatic, what's the word? Or anyway, because
PSD.
they'd been through so much. They'd seen so many dead, so many, it's just terrible, terrible, terrible.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't say that I'm sorry that I missed that. I'm not.
Oh,
I've
no.
been scared to death.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a great time of life in many ways. It's hard for these people around here to realize that one time there was over 80,000 troops stationed at Tullahoma at Camp Forrest, and there were 6,000 out at the Air Force Base there. They were learning to fly bombers. And the only trouble we had with the troops, you dated a girl on Sunday afternoon, the only place to go was the pick show, and usually there'd be 3 or 4 troops standing around out there just waiting for you to go in and start whistling at your date. But other than that, I don't remember any real problem, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But Camp Forrest was, all of us before we left this service, pretty well all my age, we worked at Camp Forrest. And my last job over there was serving draft beer at a PX. And I may be wrong about that, as I am a lot of things.
Oh.
But Billy Denton and I went together. I know you don't remember Billy Denton, he's dead now. But to my knowledge, I don't remember either one of us ever tasting that draft beer. Now that may sound far-fetched, but back in those days, as the old saying, well, we didn't drink, we didn't smoke. Somebody might say, well, how'd you have a good time? We did. We did.
Well, what was Camp Forrest? I remember hearing about that from people, but I don't think the average person knows what Camp Forrest was.
Well, Camp Forrest was, of course, it was I think, a tank and a infantry base. And
In Tullahoma.
do what?
In Tullahoma, right?
In Tullahoma.
Okay.
And like I said, it was over 80,000 out there in Camp Forrest.
Wow.
And like I said, one summer we worked over there as carpenters helping. I know we had to be good ones. I didn't know how to drive a nail from anything. Anyway, but and they paid good wages. But we had the old 2-lane highway, the old original road going from here to Tullahoma. It was a rat race half the time who you were racing with, and the roads weren't built to pass anybody. And we'd go in and go work at 8 o'clock on some mornings. When we'd go in, you'd have to detour around because they were firing shells over that road.
Oh, wow.
And then the next time you'd go in, you'd take that road, they were firing over it onto the old road you took before.
Oh.
And a farmer might wake up and look out the window and see 1,000 troops swarming down his pasture. And of course, they practiced with tanks, with Air Force, with you name it. And during the war, and I can't remember the year, but I believe it was 43, a little twin-engine Mitchell bomber crashed out down by the river bridge. He didn't crash, he landed in a cornfield and made it, survived. And then up on the Douglas property, there was a P-39, that was a little single-engine fighter that fired a 20-millimeter gun through its nose, and it crashed and killed the pilot up there. And of course, like I say, there was stuff going on all over this county. A lot of people worked German prisoners. I know Yearwood Implement worked some prisoners. They'd pick them up every morning, carry them to the farm, and they didn't try to escape. They had no place to go, so most of them just stayed there and worked. Yeah. And but back then, I was going to work one morning over at Camp Forrest, and I saw these guys out there kicking a big ball around. I had no idea what it was, but it was a bunch of Italian prisoners playing soccer. That was the first soccer that I ever saw. I didn't realize what they were doing, but they were big husky people, and they had been captured and waiting to go home.
Wow.
And, but Lord, when so many of those people went home, like to Germany, it had been blown to smithereens. There wasn't hardly anything left standing.
Sure.
And those islands, I mean, they were just wiped out. And it was a terrible thing, terrible thing. And I'm proud that a lot of those guys on the walls out there made it home.
Sure.
And a lot didn't. But anyway.
You've seen a lot in your 94 years, right?
94 years.
94 years. You've seen a lot, and you've done a lot. That experience is just hard, and you seem like you remember it like it was yesterday. I can't remember what I had last week for lunch.
Well, a lot of it I can't remember. A lot of it I should remember that I don't remember, but it was a different time of life, everything. You could buy gasoline for a few cents a gallon, or of course you had to have a stamp to get it.
Oh.
You couldn't buy anything without a stamp.
What's the stamp for?
Your gasoline.
Oh, you had
to have one for gas, you had to have one for food, you had to have one for clothes, you had to have one for just about everything.
Wow.
And now a few people, I can name one, no I can't name him either because he's dead now, made a lot of money off it, called black marketing.
Oh.
In other words, they sold They sold the goods that they weren't, how they got them, I don't know, but they got a hold of them, then they sold them at a great exorbitant price.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't have to have a stamp to get them, all you had to have was money.
Mm-hmm.
But, oh Lord, those days, we'd have when in the early 40s, we'd have drills for aircraft, and then they have a bunch of the people that would make up and be a little organization, guards, as you want to call them. I don't know what they'd have done if we'd have been invaded.
Mm-hmm.
But for a long time there, after Pearl Harbor, there was a constant fear of cities being bombed in this country, because we did have a submarine off of California that did surface and fired some shells into an oil refinery. It didn't hit anything, and so he was a bad shot. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I don't know of anything else that was ever fired at this country, except the Japanese did try to send over a bunch of balloons, helium filled, and carried explosive with them. And they sent them loose over there, hoping it'd land in Americas. And a few did, but don't think caused any damage at all.
Wow.
But laws of me, those days.
How long did you serve?
Just 17 months.
17 months.
17 months.
What was it like when you come back home?
Well, it was, everybody back then pretty well left for college. There wasn't any question about that. You just automatically picked out a place. And in fact, I found out I went to David Lipscomb, and I found out that if you did study, you could make a little bit better grades.
We all should have learned from that.
Oh, Lord, I was pitiful in high school. And my wife, she was salutatorian, which is next to valedictorian. And
married a smart woman.
You've heard about opposites attracting. Well, that happened to be opposites attracting. We certainly were not on the same key. And then we came back and got married. I went to work. First, I was trying to think. I went to work several different places, and then a job came up it was called Thomas Tire and Supply Store, and I went to work there in 1950, the first week in February. And in 1957, I bought a fourth interest in it. And in 1959, the boss man and I were not getting along all that great, and came in that Friday morning. He was getting ready to ask me to buy or sell. So I said, well, I don't want to sell, so I'll see if I can't buy you out. So I managed to do it, and then got in with Frankie Reed. I don't know whether y'all ever remember Frankie Reed.
Oh, yeah.
Frankie was working at Servin, and we were together 25 years. To my knowledge, had crosswords only one time, and that was my fault then, what happened. But, oh Lord, back
And
then.
that store was called?
Norman, it was called Thomas Tire and Supply Store.
Okay.
So then when Frankie came in, it was Norman and Reed.
Norman and Reed.
And it was Norman and Reed for 25 years, and I bought him out, and it just went Norman Furniture, and then I sold out eventually the store in Lee, out of Leoma, and Todd Lee, who is the son of one of the owners over there, came to work over here, and then Todd's daddy died, and his mother bought their part out of me and their half over there. Yeah. And of course, Todd's been there ever since, and I hate to say it, when he first came, I thought he never was going to learn to do it. He was so lazy. It turned out to be one of the best working people I've ever been around in my life. Smart, can do anything, and did anything. He doing a great job. He couldn't ask for better.
Tell everybody about your kids.
Do what?
Tell everybody about your children. You had children?
Well, of course, Tommy was my oldest son, and my son had quite a go in school. Tommy he was one of the few people that ever had a tenure almost a tenure in Beta Club.
Oh yeah.
He got in, and 2 months after he went in, he got on probation. Another month after, he was kicked out. Well, he went to school in the radio bit. He had a great radio voice.
Oh yeah.
Worked WYTM with WKR, and first year he made a 1.9 grade average on a 4-point scale. They were drafting him into the Vietnam War then. We were waiting on him to get his call. And the next year he said, Daddy, I'm not going to do this. I said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to study medicine. And I said, with those grades? He said, I'll get it. And he did. He got him up and went through and became a doctor.
He studied, like you said.
Yeah, he did. And then his younger brother was the biggest screw up in grade school. And after he became a doctor, none of his former students would dare go to him because they knew he didn't know enough to be a doctor. And anyway, he in high school, he thought a C or a D was an A+.
Me too.
And so finally he came to me one day working at the bank, doing a good job. He said, Daddy, I'm going back to school. What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to become a doctor like my brother. I didn't say anything. I thought, good gosh, not with them grades. Well, he went and blew it away when he graduated in 3 years, and
Wow.
but last year he had a 4-point average, and that's good on especially on medicine.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's got to make you proud, for sure.
So anyway, they both became doctors, and then they had Tommy, the oldest one. He has 2 girls and two boys and a girl now, and Steve had 1 boy, and it's just I'm getting to watch them grow up. And that boy, Steve's son, he has 2 little girls now that are naturally grandparents say they're little dolls, and of course they are. And Lord, how times have changed.
Times have changed. You've seen a lot, and you got a great family and a great career in the furniture business, and it all started from World War II.
World War II, yeah. I'll never know why I got to work at the store where I did. We were selling, when I started there, we were selling appliances and water pumps and all kind of stuff. In 1957 was when we first got our first furniture.
Wow.
Well, back then, if you had 3 couches, you had a big inventory. Now, if you've got 100, you don't have a big inventory.
Oh, wow.
And of course, back then, we sold strictly what was on the floor. We didn't have these design centers that they have now.
Where was these stores originally?
Right in the middle of the square.
Oh.
Right in the middle on the west side. And we were next door. What crap! The little store that was next door to us was, anyway. There was a grocery store. H.G. Hill had a store right between us and the corner where H.D. McKinney drugstore was eventually. And the morning that typhoon, I'll get it mixed up, that hurricane, I'll get right in a minute. Tornado came through.
1953.
We were the boys. I was in the middle of the store. 52. The boys came in my back and said, "Billy, come here quick, come here quick." Well, I have been known to use a little profanity, but never God's name in vain. That's one I just did.
Okay.
But anyway, I opened the door, and when I looked where the old school, where the fire station is now, that was a school.
Oh.
It was 4:25 in the afternoon on leap year, February 29th. And just as I looked, that school was exploding. It just blowing apart because there wasn't anybody in it, thank good Lord.
Oh, wow.
And the main thrust came down the main street there, North Main, here by where the banks are now. And I think it destroyed 13 business houses and about 130 homes. But it didn't kill the 2 people. That was what was so remarkable about it.
Wow.
And it's just hard to, I can still vividly remember it actually went a block north of us, the main thrust. Now it knocked the whole north wall out of our warehouse right behind us, got part of our roof, took out all of our window lights. And I tell you, there was some scary times, but the thing didn't last. And it was a slow mover, but it didn't last any time at all.
Wow.
And then thank goodness it hit in daytime. Had it hit at night, a bunch of folks would have been killed.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were at least able to see what was going on. And the next day, what was so amazing, they don't do that now, the town was flooded with cars. They came from everywhere to see the damage, and nobody stopped them. They just came and drove around. But of course, nowadays they'd block you off and go through all that stuff too.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Lord, I can remember a lot of those sites. And a boy named McCowan got killed out on DeSoto Street. Anyway, right down in that area.
Yeah.
And his house looked like it had been vacuumed. There was nothing standing but a 1/2-inch water pipe standing over next to a wall. And it blew him about 100 yards down the railroad track, and when they found him, it was difficult to tell what race he was.
Oh, wow.
And so then Mrs. McGee lived just north of him on the corner where Bob Stevenson lived later, and lawyer. And it blew her house down on top of her, and she was asphyxiated by being over a vent.
I got you.
So the storm didn't actually kill her, the suffocation did.
Just couldn't breathe.
And that was the only 2 people out of now a whole lot of people were injured.
Yeah.
And across from the Church of Christ, oh, by the way, I found out the only church you should go to back in those days. Every church in town was damaged except the First Presbyterian. so I guess that should tell you something.
That should tell you. In case of a storm, we're going to the Presbyterian.
Yeah, the Church of Christ and the Episcopal Church, they were completely destroyed. The Baptist Church was in a different, right across the street from where it is now. It was badly damaged. And a little girl that worked for us back then named Dottie Askins. And Dottie was off that day. She was at home with her 18-month-old daughter, and she saw it coming. she fell across her daughter, and her house was completely destroyed. The only thing left standing was on the eastern side was a part of a wall, and on it was part of a hood off a Templeton Pontiac car down there where the Methodists use now, blown through the wall. And her daughter got just a little bit of a scratch, don't know to this day, but that was, either one of them were hurt. And they had to be dug out of that building. But Lord, that was some, I'll tell you what, that was some scary time. And after that, when the storm got looking on Saturday, wasn't nobody on that square. They went home. And you know, those things are amazing how much they followed the same path over the years.
Yep.
I know it's twice it's been the same, maybe 3 times it's traveled the same identical path in Fayetteville. But I hear again, the Higgins Funeral Home used to have a lot of the pictures out down, whether they still do or not, of the tornado. All the houses were down, the buildings were down.
Yeah, that was a devastating time for our community for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah, and I guess in some ways I can look back on them good times, and of course there were some tough ones too.
Yeah.
And now how we ate as well as we did, I do not know, because as I say, that was one thing pretty closely guarded was food.
Yeah.
You didn't just walk in the grocery and say, hey, I want that cut of steak, or I
Sure.
want this. You had to have a stamp to get it.
Oh yeah.
And of course, them stamps didn't last that long. So if you wanted to get an egg, you had to wait on that egg.
Wow.
Well,
That's interesting.
But I was a child, and what was that old saying about I remember as a child? I guess I did.
Yeah.
I think back now, so many of the things that happened that I'll think of 1,000 things after I leave here today that I should remember, but I don't. So not now.
We could talk all day, and we could do it again sometime, because you have so many things to tell that needs to be captured.
Well, the only thing I would like to have at least $25 an hour on the talking part. Yeah.
Well, that's what I make, so you're good. You're good. Oh man.
Well, with that first job I had at Carter, I may be wrong, but I think we made $12 a week. Well, that was a whole lot of money.
Wow.
And I still have one thing that I need to apologize to Mr. George Carter about. Okay. When you went in this morning at 6 o'clock, you worked until 8 o'clock that night. If you went in at 8 o'clock, you worked till you closed. It might be 9:30. We had curb service. Yeah. And what we did back then, as far as I stole one month, we were leaving out. I guess it must have been about 10 o'clock. Had a rough time, and I stole a package of mints. And I remember that all my life.
Oh.
I stole a package. Mr. George Carter, bless his heart. I hope he didn't hold it against me.
You ain't forgot that either.
But I ain't forgot it. I ain't forgot it.
And we've all done things like that we don't forget.
Then my next job was working at Coons behind the soda fountain. And my job on Friday night was to clean up. But on that particular Friday night, we were having a hayride. And I wasn't going to miss the hayride, so I went on that. And the next morning when I came in, the fellow that was running the store time said, Norman? I said, yes, sir. He said, you're fired. I said, what's my? He said, look at that mess behind that counter. You didn't clean up last night. And he was right, I didn't, so I got fired.
Do you remember when Coons burned?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Well, what was the story there? What happened?
Well, I just remember a big fire, and I remember seemed like it brought a snorkel truck over from Shelbyville or somewhere. Yeah. The first one I'd ever seen, and of course, they did a lot of spraying, but it's 1,000 wonders, a whole lot more didn't burn up than did.
Right.
And that was quite a blaze. I well remember just the blaze part itself. and Joe Faison, I don't remember who, seemed like Joe Young got in on that somewhere by getting a cash register out or something.
Probably.
And they got the cash register out, and saved it, opened it up, and wasn't a thing in it. So
that'd be my luck.
But they had to hose down Higgins Funeral Home, keep it from catching on, and then I was trying to remember how many buildings they had to hose. And the old Holman building over on the corner, I think Don and them had to get some hoses out on that thing to keep from stuff was flying over from burning off of that building. Yeah. And I don't remember anybody being seriously hurt. I may, again, now that's too many years ago.
I don't remember either.
And of course, back then we always had a 5 and dime store, which they don't have anymore. And they were kind of like a small grade Walmart. You could buy most anything there you wanted. And of course, back in those days, if a fellow owned a business, he was on top cotton because you didn't have but two grades of people. You had the property owners, and you had the rest of us renters. You didn't have a middle class, or very little.
Yeah.
And then over the years, that middle class grew and grew and grew like it did. And but laws and me, those were the days. I can still remember that square. And Martha, what was her name? Martha, her daddy owned the milk plant. I owned the Martha Carroll. He owned the ice cream place. And I can still see her riding that little scooter coming across the north end of the square up here, riding that scooter. Why? That's the sticks in my mind. I have no idea. Of course, back then, when you come up on the square, there wasn't all that many cars. And then when I went to work at Norman at the store where I started in 1950, we didn't close till 9:30 on Saturday night, and the square would be full of people.
Wow.
Farmers would pull up in their cars and park, and the men might walk the square. The women would sit and watch people walk by because everybody was walking. I mean, just constantly. And we I never will forget the refrigerator I sold one night. About 8:30, old fella, he was drunker than a boiled owl. And I went back to grab a hold of the handle of the refrigerator, tell him about it. He said, "I'll take it." And so I had him give him a price, and yes, so bless his heart, he took it. He paid for it, but I was amazed.
That's a good sale there.
That's a good sale. Oh, Lord. And those old appliances we sold back then, they lasted and lasted. You could buy a refrigerator back then. If you didn't get 20 years out of it, there wasn't something wrong.
That's pretty good.
Now they give you a 1-year warranty. 1 year.
1 year.
That's ridiculous.
That is.
Well, anyway, folks, I hope y'all don't go off now and find where I've told a bunch of lies, because at that distance of being away, I might have.
All right, well, we appreciate it. This has been Billy Norman. We appreciate him talking to us today. It's been fun and got so many stories. We talked about the war to begin with, and then we moved into Fayetteville history, and there's probably a whole bunch more of that you remember.
Yes, sir. Can remember quite a bit. And I've been, as I say, I hope I didn't represent anything wrong, but after all, I'm old enough to be allowed a few mistakes. Okay.
You've lived a good life, 94 years old. We wish you many more years, and we hope to get to talk to you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.